being here tonight. My name is Daniel Harvey. I'm the artistic producer and community director for Opera Parallel. It's such a pleasure to be here back at SF Jazz, one of Opera Parallel's favourite venues and favourite places to be. Thank you for being here tonight for this conversation. This is part of our preparation for our audiences for the upcoming production of Birds and Balls, which will be playing right here next door in the Minor Auditorium. So for those of you who are new to Opera Parallel, we're a contemporary performance company based here in SF that's all about telling relevant and engaging stories through music. This event is part of OP's community programs, which we call the Bullhorn. This reflects our aspiration to be a bullhorn for our community, after the example of late San Francisco supervisor Harvey Milk. The Bullhorn is also designed to enhance our audience's experiences of our productions, allowing you to dive a little deeper into the stories you see on our stages. So tonight we're fortunate to have an exciting group of speakers to serve and volley, if you will, about the topic of sex when it comes to competition, Title IX, and Billie Jean King. So to quickly introduce our exciting guests, let me just turn the page. So first up, we have Noreen Farrell. Noreen is a distinguished legal advocate whose entire career, has been dedicated to advancing social justice. She is Executive Director of Equal Rights Advocates and is recognised as a top leader in law and a trailblazer in gender equality. Noreen has litigated civil rights cases all the way to the Supreme Court and chairs the Equal Pay Today campaign, leading efforts to close the gender wage gap nationwide. Her insightful commentary and expertise are frequently sought after by prominent media outlets, including the New York Times, MSNBC, and National Public Radio, among others. Christina Karl is a trailblazing figure in sports journalism, serving as sports editor for the San Francisco Chronicle since 2021. With a rich background that includes senior editorial roles covering Major League Baseball at ESPN.com, her commitment to inclusive and comprehensive sports coverage has garnered accolades and expanded recognition for women's sports within the Chronicle's pages. And Indre Viscontis, who will be moderating the conversation tonight, is a neuroscientist, opera stage director, and science communicator across all mediums. Combining a passion for music with scientific curiosity, she is an associate professor of psychology at the University of San Francisco, where she runs the Creative Brain Lab, and is the creative director for Pasadena Opera. She is also the host of popular science podcast Inquiring Minds, and has appeared on national radio and television, including The Oprah Winfrey Show. And lastly, but of course not least, we have the wonderful Tiffany Austin. Tiffany is a multifaceted talent, renowned as a vocalist, composer, and educator. Having graced stages alongside jazz luminaries such as Pharoah Sanders and Roy Ayers, she has captivated audiences worldwide, from the Birdland in New York City to right here at SF Jazz. Tiffany also holds a Juris Doctor from UC Berkeley and has performed numerous times with Opera Parallel, including as Harriet Tubman in Marcus Shelby's Harriet Spirit, and is currently appearing as Marilyn, Billie Jean King's lover, in Birds and Balls. So to start off the evening, we're going to have a little amuse-bouche, if you will, of musical amuse-bouche. Tiffany will be performing an excerpt from the opera, along with OP resident pianist Keisuke Nakagoshi. Yeah. Let's welcome them.
Let's test this out. Okay.
Today I wore brown and blue. In yoga, brown stands for my blue for you, blue for me. Secretaries, a strange word for what I am to you.
Oh man, I could just listen to that all night. That was lovely. So, sometime around puberty, the hormones turn on a competitive drive in a lot of kids. You can tell the difference between a 4th grade basketball team and a 6th grade basketball team by how aggressive they are in the court. The 4th graders will often just give away the ball because they're interested in conforming and in being nice to another, but the 6th graders are now competing. They'll pull the ball away. But we now know that the biology of sex and gender is not as binary as we used to think. In fact, if you showed me a brain, I would not be able to definitively tell you whether it belongs to someone who identifies as male or female or non-binary. Instead, our brains are mosaics. Yes, if you gave me 100 brains that were from female identifying individuals and 100 brains of male identifying individuals, we would find some differences, but no individual brain contains all the markers of a male or a female brain. So what does that mean in terms of how we think about what gender identity and how equality really features in terms of sports? It's not just our brains that are mosaics. The same is true of our hormone levels, of our physical features, and even our DNA. Because our DNA does not act in a vacuum, it needs an environment in which to express those genes. So when you get to this age where kids start seeing each other as having one gender or another, they do tend to gravitate towards the gender with which they identify. So in order to make things equal, of course, is also something that kids very much are interested in. What is fair? We need to start understanding how we're going to define equity in sports. So, Noreen, difficult question, first one to you. How should we define equity when it comes to gender in sports?
Okay, how many hours do we have? No. Well, full disclosure, I'm very excited to be here. I was a college athlete. I am a musician. This is totally my jam. So I am so excited about this topic for this opera. So thank you for having me. And I'm spreading the word so a lot of people come. Look, I think you said it so well. What we're seeing in terms of language about non-binary is what many of us have often already seen in athletics over the decades. Formally and legally, equity in sports and Title IX, which was passed in 1972, just around the time of the battle, that'll be the subject matter of the opera, really requires equal opportunities to participate. It requires equal investment in terms of investment in coaches and scholarships and facilities. And so it's interesting that the law requires equal opportunity, but the politicization of this conversation has been about who wins and who doesn't. I think the fact of the matter is that 20 states, the NCAA, the Olympic Committee have had rules for many years that have accommodated trans athletes, and they've done it quite well. And like all people, trans people are sometimes not athletic. They are shorter, they're weaker, they're stronger. There's as much diversity amongst trans athletes as there are among everyone sitting in this room. And so I think we have to challenge ourselves about how trans kids, who are the most persecuted students in our entire country, how they have become a battleground for in the name of women's equity is not something that my organization accepts. And we're here to navigate all the complexities of all different kinds of people and what their characteristics are, and make sure that anybody who's gender marginalized has an equal opportunity to play. And Billie G. King believes the same.
So that brings me to this question of who gets to define what gender a particular athlete should be categorized as. Since when it comes to the psychology, I mean, I can't tell you from looking at their brains. There are lots of examples of people who have the DNA of one sex, but present genitalia of the other. So where, from a legal perspective, does that categorization happen?
Well, I think that, certainly once you get to the collegiate and Olympic and elite level, there is hormone testing that is, provides some sort of scientific basis for whether or not your hormone levels are that of what is a cisgender male or female. But that can change if you have gender affirming care when you're a young person. So our position and it's the position that we take in our cases is that people should play according to their gender identity, and if there's a hormone indicator at the elite and collegiate level that makes that not sustainable in terms of your gender identity, then there are rules to manage that. And they've been doing it quite well. So.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that seems to me is like an equity issue, because of course there are differences in terms of how much lung capacity a person has. Mm-hmm. And a person with a better lung capacity might have an edge in a particular sport, and yet we don't say, well, you have to have.
It's only not fair.
Yeah, right. Right. So I think that's there's a number of cases now, I think, about the hormone levels, even for somebody who who hasn't had any gender affirming care, but their hormone levels just tend to be in one direction or another. How do we acknowledge that there is this nebulousness to this gender identity and yet still provide a fairness to the competition? Because after all, a competition isn't interesting if the outcome is inevitable. You need to have some, I think both for the players, but also there has to be like a chance that you can win.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well, as somebody who covers some of these issues. I think that the reality is that the percentage of trans athletes is extremely small. It's very small. And then the percentage of those that are actually competing and winning in competitions is even smaller. And so, we're, in some ways, we position this as a red herring, that it is, and at the elite level, there are rules to govern in terms of, who can participate. And so from our perspective, this is about making sure that there's equal opportunities to compete, and that doesn't always mean a win in a particular instance. And at the elite level, where there may be a trans athlete that is vying for top positioning, there are really clear scientific rules and testing that happens that align people to where they should be in their races, or in their competitions. But look, this is a cultural zeitgeist moment, and it's not easy. It's not complicated. We really approach it with compassion, with openness, with curiosity, with an understanding of the science, and really an acute awareness of how this can be politicized to the detriment of young people that are already subject to incredible persecution throughout the country.
Please, Christina.
Yeah, I know we pivoted very quickly into trans people in sports, but I would dial it back and also bring back to your original point, which is that we're basically running up against the realization of how diverse the human species is. Mm-hmm. And so like in setting aside trans athletes, like we also have the question of like intersex athletes and where they fit in. And this goes back Caster Semenya. If you were running against Caster Semenya, well, you lose, but that was and so the question of fairness became central to that. But where does Caster Semenya run? again, she would have had no idea or no reason to understand that she was even intersex without testing. And so, like, you know, she had no idea. We get into the question of whether or not testosterone levels are about, you know, that's a male hormone. Well, no, it's a human hormone. It occurs naturally in women as well. So, and there are women who have higher testosterone levels than, or I'd say natal females who have testosterone levels that are higher than, like, you know, natal males. So it's like the species is just incredibly complex and, you know, a lot more diverse than I mean, go back to 1936. One of America's first Olympians, Stella Walsh, was intersex. We didn't know that. She knew it, but we didn't know that until she died in like 1979. And so, like, you know, the fact that should we feel differently about her competing in 1936? No, we shouldn't. She was awesome. She won. Okay, that we can embrace that. But I think the question is, you know, like, what's fair? And I think, you know, like, the fact that a bunch of people who suddenly care about women's sports, who never cared about women's sports, you know, over the previous 40, 50 years, suddenly care about women's sports because it's a political football. Well, that gets into their motives. But there is a question of fairness that I think we all, as sports fans, those of us who are sports fans, but sports fans do care about. And so it's important to embrace that as something that, you know, like, is a serious part of the conversation. And just because somebody is, you know, agit-propping this topic to basically enable a bunch of legislation that is aimed at people like me necessarily, but, you know, there are two different conversations, and people who want to conflate them, I think, are, you know, that's where we get into their motives. But fundamentally, you know, like, in the same way that Caster Semenya is going to beat everybody she was running against until they made her take, you know, hormone supplements to make sure that she got slower, which, okay, then we're against performance-enhancing drugs for some people, but we're in favor of performance, like, hampering drugs for others? What's the message there? But, you know, on the other hand, if you were swimming against Michael Phelps or Katie Ledecky, chances are you lose. Why? Because you happen to be a swimmer competing against the best athlete on the planet in your particular sport. You're never going to get the gold medal. Okay, because why? Michael Phelps has a genetic advantage, of course, because you mentioned lung capacity, but just, he's Michael Phelps. You're going to lose. Sorry.
That just reminds me of an interview I read where Simone Biles' teammates were like, yeah, you know, if you get second place, you really got first place, because, like, you know, it's always going to be Simone. So, Christina, can you tell us about the historical significance of Billie Jean King's impact on tennis and gender equity and on sports then more broadly?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in 1973, it's her suit that really kind of sets up the proposition that a top female athlete should be making exactly the same as the top male athletes. And the fact that here we are now 50 years later, and that still is a problem in terms of, like, pay equity for professional athletes, or, you know, like, setting aside, like, the weirdness of what we're dealing with, the name, image, and likeness, and compensating amateur athletes at the present, which again is, there are incentives that have nothing to do with sports, and it's kind of like a messed up Wild Wild West environment right now for amateur sports. But in professional sports, the fact that, you know, like, we're in this weird situation where the expectations of a top tier WNBA player that, you know, like, you might have to fly commercial, you won't be making a lot of money, you won't be making life-changing money, you'll instead have to also play in foreign leagues in your off season and, you know, be scrambling all the time. NBA players don't have to deal with any of that. And they're owned by the same people, effectively. I mean, the NBA is operating the WNBA, so the idea that, well, you know, Moses Moody is going to be making more than almost and, you know, lovely player, nice guy, good dude on the Warriors, but, you know, 12th in their rotation, is making more than, you know, like, people who have been building the WNBA into, like, you know, the increasing juggernaut in terms of public acceptance. And, you know, the fact that most of the players in that league are never going to see Moses Moody money is fundamentally unfair, but that's where we're at. And even when, again, it's really frustrating, but, you know, as much progress as we've seen, you know, again, I'd go, taking it back to Billie Jean King, her standing up and basically saying, this needs to be fought and I deserve to be treated the same, it was a critical moment in American sports. And, you know, it kind of segues into the battle of the sexes, but, you know, in the whole proposition, we owe her so much for getting as far as we've gotten, even as much as we still have yet to do.
But I just want to follow up, Christina. What do you think it was about Billie Jean King that became this watershed moment? And like, in terms of her personality, or was it her stature? Or was it just like her dominance of the field?
I think it's a combination of her dominance in the field and the fact that, particularly in American society, women's sports were still put on this lower rung and treated as like, well, that's nice, you know, compared to what, you know, like again, I'd say what Margaret Court, you know, like was being celebrated and feted in Australia, and you know, like as a national hero, and it just was a very different. I think it's nationally specific to the way in which America looked at female athletes at that time, and the fact that she wasn't having it, and that was, you know, like something that needed to be said. And I think, you know, yes, it also plays into the zeitgeist of the 60s, the early 70s. You end up with this dynamic of change in cross-professional sports with, you know, the introduction of free agency, the idea that players are not chattel, that they should be able to make the same choices about like where they work and for who and for how long and how much they're going to make and have power. The fact that I think Billie Jean King is essentially like a trailblazer within women's sports because she saw what was changing across all sports and said, this belongs to women as well. Female athletes deserve this same kind of power and ability to make decisions about their own lives. And, you know, all of this really kind of growing also, I think, out of integration so that it ends up being, you know, extremely intersectional. I know that's a word that doesn't occur in history then for another 30 years. But, you know, like the way in which Billie Jean King and people of color in American professional sports all kind of started standing up and saying, like, I deserve a fair shake as well. I think she was, you know, like not only the standard bearer, but also I think reflected what was changing in American sports as a whole. And because she was also, you know, really very grounded, she was not, you know, in sports you have your prima donnas, but I mean, she was somebody who was not, she was ready for the fight on the terms that it was going to have to be conducted, I think, whether in the courtroom or in terms of negotiating contracts, and with a level of gravitas that she was going to win and not settle.
I mean, I think Billie Jean King was sort of inevitable. You know, she was uniquely qualified for that moment, but you know, at the moment of the battle, you know, 1% of all athletic budgets were going towards women. You know, boys were getting athletic participation opportunities 12.5%, you know, more than women, 12.5 to 1 in every single school. You know, remember this is the energizing of the Equal Rights Amendment at this time. Roe v. Wade had just been decided, but women still couldn't get credit cards in their own name, right? They could be fired for, you know, being pregnant. They were harassed in the workplace. And so when you think about her, just the timing of her courage in the context not just of sports, but this feminist movement moment is, you know, incredibly exciting. And I think the fact that it was juxtaposed like against such a sexist guy, I pulled up the quote that he said. I wanted to read it correctly because I heard he basically said this, but I had to remind myself. I like them real good in the bedroom, the kitchen. I really think the best way to handle the women is to keep them pregnant and barefoot. You know, and so she wasn't just about showing that she could be, you know, athletically superior to a man, but she was debunking the various stereotypes that were influencing, you know, spheres throughout the country. And so it really was such an energizing moment and necessary. And the fact that it happened before 90 million people televised is also just speaks to sort of how technology and you know, creates these cultural moments that, you know, really still resonate. And she's an icon to this day. So
staying on the topic a little bit of Billie Jean and this piece that Tiffany, you're going to be performing in as a jazz artist and cast member in Birds and Balls. How do the themes of competition, feminism, intersect in this production for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's there's one quote from one of the pieces that is really strong for me. It says, Billie Jean says, pressure is a privilege. And so we have the juxtaposition of the way that women are expected to behave, to be, according to, Bobby, you know, women are supposed to be barefoot and pregnant and kind of have this leisurely existence in a box. And so Billie Jean, you know, in real life and also in this production, she steps out and she steps away from maybe that safe, squared off existence to step into pressure and also to build something for the future. So yeah, it's really exciting for me to see that dramatized. And then you know, just bringing up the idea of jazz. You asked me as a jazz singer, and for me, I've encountered some very interesting energies around being a female musician. So, and I also think that jazz can sometimes be viewed as a competitive sport. If you've ever been to a jazz jam session, anyone here has done that? It can get a little tense. And so, for me, when I step into musical situations, I try to just think of myself as like a musician and let everyone else go through their own emotional changes about what they expect of me as a woman or whatever they put on me as far as a black person in general. So yeah, it's really exciting production.
Is that what drew you to the production, or was there something else that caught your eye?
Well, I love the fact that we're bringing together these musical elements, or I wish that I could take credit for it, but you know, you have this opera element, and then the character that I'm playing, Marilyn, who was Billie Jean's lover, the songs that are in the production are for my character are jazz inflected, and so it's really nice to blend those textures together. That sparked my interest.
So Noreen, tell us about the aftermath of Title IX. What are the barriers that it has brought down? How has it promoted gender equity? And what's left? I mean, I think we all know where the challenges remain, but how well has it kept to its promise?
Well, I can't retire yet. Brought a lot of Title IX cases in my day, but I will say that this battle really set the stage not just for sports cases, but cases involving every place where women have not been their seat at the table. I was sharing that we brought a case against jazz at Lincoln Center. I know Boo Hiss, but they had never had a female instrumentalist in their 26 years as an institution. And I think that what Billie Jean is so powerful at doing, and what Title IX aims at, is looking at what are the structural reasons why that persists. Maybe sexism causes it to exist, but why does it persist? And at Jazz at Lincoln Center, it was as easy as saying, hey, so like the classical music industry had this thing like blindfold auditions in the 70s that increased the percentage of women instrumentalists, like by 75%. So maybe that's a structural thing that you can do to make sure that you're checking your bias. And so this battle, I think, really set the stage for it isn't just about it isn't just about your physical ability, but it is, do you have the best coaches? Are you coached by people from your own sex? Are you given scholarships? Are you cultivated? And that sort of is the richness of Title IX. I'll say that since the battle, there's some good percentages. The female participation in high school has grown by 1,057% and 614% at the college level. And you would know just sort of the investment and the professionalization of sports teams and media coverage, I think, has just been incredibly astounding. But I will say that it is often sports, and this is why Title IX is so important. It's often sports. In my business, I do a lot of policy work on gender discrimination work, and in the past decade, we've been able to pass 150 laws at the state level strengthening equal pay laws. We've only been able to pass one in Congress in 10 years, and that came out after the World Cup pay equity case, requiring pay equity for professional athletes who are women. And it really was the one bill where everyone could really agree and get past their political differences, because it's a uniting cultural force in our country. And so there is plenty of work to be done. We continue to need courageous stories to really propel Title IX. Unfortunately, in my business, we're still recovering from the Trump administration and Betsy DeVos and people who had no idea actually what civil rights laws were, and had a serious malice towards them. So there was a lot of defense, and that continues. But I will say that as a mother of somebody who both one child does opera and the other does sports, there's changed expectations about where girls belong, and there is a very rigorous, powerful community of athletes, coaches, and activists and lawyers that are here to make sure that the real promise of that law is seen through. And even as we go through a cultural shift in terms of what gender is.
So Christina, let's talk about the media. Obviously you're not solely responsible for all of the ways in which female athletes are portrayed in the media. But let's talk about your strategy. How do you avoid stereotypes, but have this balance between celebrating achievements and avoiding bias?
Well, it's an interesting question, because one of the, it also comes from the leagues themselves. One of the interesting things is the culture, like the expectation for covering women's sports that the leagues want to inculcate among journalists is that we're supposed to celebrate everything that female athletes do, as opposed to it's funny, a friend of mine who's a beat writer who covers the Chicago Sky got in a lot of trouble with the Sky because she was critical of the fact that they were not performing very well, and she was critical of the fact that several of the players were outspoken and the coach might need to be fired and things like that. And the league and the team pushed back very hard and said, like, you're saying a lot of negative things about us. And I was like, covering you like a real sport, and that means like I'm treating you like any other sport, and I'm treating you the same way I would treat the Bulls when they struggle, and they struggle a lot. And so this is what it looks like, that if you're going to be taken seriously as a league on this level, then you have to be used to the criticism, and you have to get inured to it. That it is tremendous. It's wonderful that we have the WNBA. It's wonderful that we have the WNBA coming to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
overdue. But that's awesome. But that also means that you're a professional athlete, and with that comes expectations, and you're getting paid to do this. So we all want you to succeed. We want the franchise to succeed. We want the league to succeed. We want individual athletes, if we're fans, to succeed. But I'm also going to have to be a journalist and cover you critically. And so this weird kind of expectation that I think the WNBA in particular has this culture, and I don't know if this is coming down from Adam Silver on down, that it's just nice that we have this, isn't it? And it's like, yeah, but the women on the floor want to be awesome, and they want to win. They're not just celebrating being on the floor. They want to win a title. That's their job, and they love it. And so treating it on that level of seriousness and is something that is important for us in terms of how we cover women's sports, and have kind of more heavily than a lot of local papers invested in local sports, or I'd say in women's sports. But then beyond that, I think that goes back to, I'd say, my experience at ESPN, where the virtue that we inculcated when ESPNW was created was that it's a sport like any other, and it has to be treated on the same level of respect and from the same place. And so in ESPN, within the journalistic community, has always been kind of like the industry leader in covering women's sports and covering them seriously, but also in terms of hiring women. And so, I want to say, overall, if you look at all newspapers, women who are journalists, sports journalists, like the numbers are under 20% collectively. The ESPN, it's over 40. And so, which is a huge difference. I mean, they pull up the entire industry effectively. And so it's a lot worse than that, 20% number might lead you to think, because ESPN is actually doing its job in terms of hiring. And that's not all just ESPNW. It's not about like women are only covering women's sports or men are only covering men's sports or anything like that. That it's really about like creating an expectation. Everybody who's good should be in this room, and that doesn't see gender and shouldn't see gender. Getting there in journalism is just as much a problem, I think, and has been just as much as it has been in sports.
Here you talk about what the leagues want. I feel like somebody needs to tell them, like, if there's no drama, nobody's interested, right? Like, there'd be no opera if everything went okay and there was no drama, right? And yet, competition, which creates drama, sometimes is seen as not feminine, and that there is like a, is that something that comes up even in a kind of implicit way, that if, and if there is competition, it like veers towards this other word that is sometimes an awful stereotype used to denigrate women. What do you think about this like sense of?
You're asking a trans woman about performative femininity, and I'm just going to say, I would say that, from my perspective, that doesn't see gender. That's about like how you want to present yourself and how you interact. I grew up on a horse ranch. I was taught how to break a horse at 8 years old by a really tough lady who happened to be Mom. And, so maybe it's because I wasn't raised with June Cleaver or whatever, but instead I was raised with somebody who was tough and who was going to teach me about how to be tough. And that, I don't see that as gendered, and I don't think that quality is gendered. Some of the toughest athletes that I've performed or competed with or performed against were women and not men, and some men are big babies, and so I don't think it's about that so much as just that we create these loops of like what is expected from women, what is expected from men, as opposed to what's expected from people and competitors, people who want to win and are hard asses about it. You can respect that, because that's about who they want excellence in themselves. They're pursuing that, and that isn't about gender. That's about and if you're a little tightly wound and uptight about it, well, okay, that comes out in different people in different ways. But, baseball certainly has its share of red asses. Pardon my French, but...
well, now you can see them, too, with your new uniforms.
Quite. But, and yet that's always defined as coded by some people as a positive. And it's like, whereas other people would say, like, it's coded as, that's a lousy coworker and teammate and, like, somebody I don't want to be around. That isn't about gender. That's about, like, are you an effective colleague in the workplace? In this case, it would be about sports. There are people who are great to play with, who are that hard, that intense, and there are people who are that hard and intense, are terrible to work with and actually bring a team down or make you like self-conscious about your performance in a way that isn't a positive feedback loop. And so it's always in terms of interpersonal chemistry between people. I don't see it as gendered. I see it as about like, do you want to work or play with or against this person?
As I was listening to your question, I was thinking, we don't have those stereotypes anymore. It's about how much money you're getting and how much investment and whether or not you get airtime and all of that. And I was just reminding myself of this interaction I had with one of my kids. I loved going to see basketball games. I often saw a lot of men's basketball games. And we were driving home at some point, and she said, okay, so the girls they're the cheerleaders, and then the boys play basketball. And of course, like, we went to every single USF women's basketball team, game after that for the next 5 years. But by the same token, it's, I think that seeing women as athletes is really much more common, but seeing women as owners, seeing women as coaches that get mad and lose their shit, that are competitors, seeing women who are investing, seeing people who are reporting on women and men's sports who, it's what is seen, and how it's the same way characters are depicted and by whom, and it's so important that to remember that those stereotypes just grab so quickly, so young. I was like, don't ever tell anyone you said that to your feminist mother lawyer. I've clearly done something wrong, but it's these lessons about what you see. And I think that Billie Jean's story is, you see me here, you see me unafraid, and you know what, she could have lost, right? But that it wasn't out of the question for her to be there and saying, come on, give me the best that you've got. And so I think that's sort of the challenge of the movement. It's never resting in terms of those stereotypes.
Although, to Billie Jean's credit, I would also say, I think it was Martina, of all people, who said, like, if there was one person you did not want to, with match point, like, everything on the line, who was the person you were most afraid to be up against? It was Billie Jean King. And, and as terrifying as Martina was on the court, for her to say, like, well, I was scared of that person, like, it's kind of a big deal. I mean,
we're going to open it up to the audience in just a minute, but before we do, I wonder if any of you have a specific instance in which Title IX that you've seen that's effects, either in your own lives or in your clients or people that you've covered, or Tiffany in your life. Tell us a story. Somebody tell us a story.
So can I make a really bad confession? So I have a law degree, and yet I don't remember like the text of Title IX. So this is non-discrimination in all
educational programs, including sports. Federally funded.
Goodness. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was, I grew up in Watts, California, and so for me, the school that I went to was underfunded, and we had like old textbooks that were out of date. And I ended up getting into this like gifted children's program. And so it was kind of bittersweet, because I got bused into this school that was really beautiful and had great books and facilities and great teachers. And so, Title IX, opened up a world for me, a world of education for me that was not available to the other kids in the neighborhood. But I feel like, I'm just grateful that was a way for me to kind of dovetail into my further future academic life. But as you can see, all the law school has evaporated off the brain here. So.
And I knew I liked you. We'll bring you back in at the opportune moment.
Christina Marine, any?
Definitely, but it's not Title IX specific so much as just 5th grade, playing flag football. We had, and it was a team of all boys, so I'm not saying anything about myself, but it was a team of all boys playing flag football, and we had a girl whose parents sued for her right to play flag football on the team. And so 70s, I am that old. And so 5th grade, Corey sues, and she makes it onto the team. She doesn't just make it onto the team, she ends up being the quarterback, because she is easily, outside of Koya, was the best athlete on the field. And so Koya, who could throw far but inaccurately, she was far more accurate and far smarter on her feet. So not only did our coach embrace the fact that Corey was going to be on the team, but he made her the quarterback, and she was awesome. And we went to the playoffs, and we beat Cowan, our hated enemy. And I will never forget the moment when we're walking off the field, and one of the Cowan boys is sobbing, and his dad cheers him up with, "Well, it's okay, son. They cheated. They had a girl." And loved hearing that.
Can't win.
No, loved hearing that. But then the better part of the story is then in 6th grade, Laura came out and joined the team too. And so another girl said well, if Corey's going to play, I want to play too. And so, and that was that. And now today I just think about that, because maybe and I know I'm going to be a name dropping terrible person, but I was talking to Steve Young a couple of weeks ago about his involvement in girls flag football. That's where we need to be as far as creating leagues and opportunities and equal opportunities for girls to play sports in the sports that they see or want to play. And so, seeing that growth in flag football certainly goes back to me, again, way longer ago than I care to admit, but just takes me back to Corey and Laura.
Well, quick personal. I am, neither one of my parents went to college. My mother was widowed with 5 kids when we were young, and sports was an opportunity for me to go to campuses where I would never have been before. And I was like, well, I like this one. They're like, this one's called Yale. Okay, I don't know what you're thinking. This one's really nice. It just opening up your horizons about where you belong and should be, and I, my life came with a lot of privileges that others don't have, but sports as a means to just further your education remains pivotal. We do a lot of cases involving making sure there's equity in scholarships so that people can feel like they can participate. And I will say that an important frontier are girls and gender non-binary folks in what have been historically male sports. I litigated a really massive case on behalf of women wrestlers at Davis. And they came up when there were just a couple of high school wrestling teams, and the male coach said, well, come on, we'll get you out in some open tournaments. You'll compete against other women, but come onto the team, we'll give you some money. And at some point, I think the administration sort of woke up and was like, oh, wait a minute, you can't have women on this team. And we had that battle. And as that was happening, the proliferation of girls wrestling teams in high schools were just exploding. And then of course we settled the case the first year that there was women wrestling at the Olympics, and now women from the US predominate in that sport. And so it is a journey. We actually didn't take that case to a jury trial. We tried it in front of a judge because the feedback we got from the jury was just a very sexualized view of women wrestling. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, okay, I don't think we're going to win here. We were very clear on the law and the opportunities need to be provided, and we won that case ultimately. And then ultimately, those young women unfortunately lost the opportunity to compete. They fought for future generations. And so when you think about Title IX and the plaintiffs that are in those cases, they're fighting for future generations. Their college experience is done so quickly that they don't ever have that opportunity. And I think that's just the real testament to the movement, to all justice movements, the people that are sort of paying it forward for others ahead of them. And Billie Jean certainly did that and continues to do that.
So now it's your turn. Yep.
I'd love to get all your insights on the bathroom thing. I have a trans guy in my extended family. He's in college now. I don't know him terribly well. I'd love to have this conversation someday, but I've always been curious about this. Seeing hysteria over this and these bills saying you must use the restroom associated with your gender assignment at birth, which to me would mean that Caitlyn Jenner should use the men's room and Chaz Bono should use the ladies' room. And I'm thinking, what would be more disruptive than that for everyone involved? So what's behind this hysteria about the bathrooms?
I mean, what I will say is, I have a trans child too, and my husband and I were thinking about. He went to Oberlin College, and he said there were open showers where you would shower next to people of the opposite sex. And in my bathrooms at Yale, it was all co-ed bathrooms, and so that was the late '80s, and so it just it is an incredible hysteria. It's very politicized. It's very political. Opportunism, I think, it fans fear. But I mean, I grew up in mixed gender bathrooms in college, so it really is. I just think it exposes it for what it is personally.
Yeah, chances are you've used the same. Like if you grew up with your parents, you use the same bathroom. You didn't gender segregate your bathrooms in the house you grew up in. And if there was just the one, again, that's where it's like. So yeah, it is kind of weird. It is kind of performative. It is this kind of stagey moral panic that that there's this danger, and it's like, well, the data, which is boring as all hell, but the data is very clear that trans people don't represent a threat to other people when they're in the in the restrooms of the gender they identify with. So there is no situation as far as danger to people. On the other hand, if you put me in a men's room, yeah, I would probably be in more danger, and this data actually backs up that put trans people in the wrong bathroom from the trans person's perspective, they are at greater risk for being assaulted, beaten up, etc. And so it's just sort of like, all right, so the numbers don't back you up on this, the facts don't back you up on this, but you still want to have this fight. Okay, well that's, again, about what they want to have, which is this kind of like, it borders on a Salem witch trial. It's just kind of crazy, but they want it, and they think they can win it politically.
Well, maybe you could address the point that the first battle of the sexes was with Bobby Riggs and Margaret Court, and she lost. And so the question is, why did Margaret Court lose? Because she was quite a celebrated woman tennis player. Was she, anyway, you can just answer the question of why you think she lost as opposed to Billie Jean King winning. And the second is, I would like your take on men coaching women, professional and college athletes. And what I think about it, like I have never I like basketball. I've never rooted for UConn because like I've rooted for the teams that are coached by these pioneering women like Tennessee and Stanford and a bunch of other ones now, Baylor, whatever. And it seemed, I've read articles where the women are complaining that they're not allowed to coach men and they're not getting the opportunity to coach women. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think the Margaret Court question wasn't Margaret Court also significantly older when she played Bobby Riggs as opposed to like Billie Jean King was 20, she wasn't even 30 yet. So she was still in the prime of her career, and so like, I think it was kind of maybe Bobby Riggs' machismo as far as like, like, well, I can take anybody. And it's like, well, no, you can't. But, like, you raise a great point as far as like, the women coaching men. I mean, there's a lot of sexism that goes into, okay, well, who are the athletic directors making the hire? Who do they hire? They hire their friends or the people they know or the people they're most comfortable with. And they don't often like look outside their circle. And so in the same way that you see issues with hiring, like race coding and hiring. And so it's like, well, I knew this guy because we used to work together here. And so I just happened to hire him and he just happens to be another white dude. What a surprise. But, like, so there's a lot of that, unfortunately, in the very small world that there is in terms of any kind of coaching universe, like collegiate coaching. You're only talking about a couple hundred jobs, a couple hundred people who know each other or have relationships going back a ways. So that's always going to be a problem. I think it's absolutely an issue in terms of, I mean, look at, I'll bring up two, I know I always bring things back to baseball because that was my first real sport of love, but look at Alyssa Nakken now with the Giants. She's been a tremendous coach with the Giants, but like suddenly the Giants have to grow up, and Major League Baseball has to grow up with the idea of she is also allowed to take maternity leave, and she should not lose her job. Why would there be any question of that? Like the rest of the professional world, this would be inconceivable, but baseball, like 50 years after Title IX, but and decades of like further as far as like women shouldn't be in danger of losing their job just for getting pregnant. She shouldn't have to worry about her job, and yet the Giants have to grow up and be a real world workplace where they embrace the fact that, oh yeah, we have this obligation to her where she's going to have to be take maternity leave in the middle of the regular season. So what? Embrace it, just like if we're a workplace. This is our job. She is great, and we're going to continue to employ her, and everything should be fine. On the other hand, then you look at something like what happened with Kim Ng, and Kim and I go way back because we went to college together, but, as the first woman to be a general manager in Major League Baseball, and, 20 years after she was ready for the job because she's tremendous, and then, she takes the Marlins of all teams to the playoffs, which no sane person would have expected, but she made it happen because she's, again, really good at it. And then the owner's response is, well, good job, but I want to hire I want to keep you in that job, and I'm going to give a guy with baseball experience, with some title inflation, he'll be the team president, but he will handle baseball operations and you'll report to him. To which she said, and to her credit, it's like, no, I quit. If you're going to do that to me after I have spent the last 3 years, and spent, 25 years before that just to get to this point. And you're going to do that to me after everything that I've done for baseball and the stuff that she's done far transcend, like beyond what she did with the Marlins, everything that she has done for women in Major League Baseball, and the amount of water she has carried and the tremendous work she's done, and then to be treated like that, to her credit, I texted her right away. I was like, good for you, you did the right thing, because this is unacceptable that she would be literally, kicked back after she had already taken this team further than anybody would have believed. So there's still a huge problem with sexism, both as far as when women are brought in and over and given these opportunities or earn these opportunities, Kim, to be treated that shabbily is just unacceptable, and she did not take it. But then does that resolve the issue? Does that make the Marlins do better? Unfortunately not. They're went out and hired a dude and they're doing their thing, and they're gonna go back to being terrible. But at what point will the lesson be learned that it's about the ability of the person, and you shouldn't be looking at gender? I would love to see more of it. We are seeing some improvement, in some of the men's sports, as far as the understanding that some players are more comfortable talking about performance issues, as a hitter or as a pitcher, or in football, with any aspect of their game. They may take instruction better from this coach, who happens to be coming at it from this point of view, as opposed to that. And if it happens to be a woman versus a guy screaming in his face, well, then just hire the coach that is actually going to get the best results out of the player. And so not worrying about which gender, is it a man or a woman. As much progress as we've seen, like I said, I still look at the unacceptable situation that Kim found herself in, and just goes to show how much more progress has to be made.
So I don't know about you, but I'm certainly ready for another performance by Tiffany and Casey K. But before we get there, one quick last word from you, Noreen. If you were to litigate this particular issue, how do you think you would approach the case?
Of coaches?
Of coaches, yeah.
Oh, I've done that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no, I think like so many, everything from the political sphere to different industries, people fight so hard to get just representation, and then they get there, and then they're accepting less pay, they're accepting more onerous, job conditions. Somebody who might be out on a disability leave because they blew their knee. That's fine, there's service credits for that, but if they take out a leave to have a baby, that's not credited. So it's we see this parallel in all industries, and I think there is a very powerful movement about representation among women as coaches. They have, they've grown up with Title IX for the past 4 decades, and I think you're going to be seeing a lot more cases, not just about the hiring, but how they're getting paid. Are they being given equal budgets? Are they being given travel budgets to go recruiting? All the things that make teams great are important in addition to representation, and we're still behind. So thank you for raising that. A lot of cases to file.
I'll sing to you. my Billie Jean.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. One more time for Tiffany Austin and Cascade Kodashi. And please join me in thanking the amazing panel tonight, Noreen Farrell, Idris Pontus, and Christina Carl. Thank you so much. As Nicole said, Upper Parallel presents Birds and Balls right next door at the Minor Auditorium from April 5 to 7. Tickets are available at upperparallel.org/birdsandballs, or right here at the box office if you want to get them on the way out. You can get them right there. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks back at SS. Thank you.